Well, it's a really hard thing to put your finger on as to why some spaces resonate and some don't. Like I've been to some spaces in buildings where you can kind of walk in and get a chill, or the hairs on the back of your neck kind of rise up. And you're thinking, well, what is it about this space that kind of resonates in that way? And it's really hard to identify what it is. But I think in some ways, it's about what you would call that interstitial space, the space between the inside and the outside.
So, Craig Moller, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We've been chatting a bit off air around all sorts of different topics. I feel like we've already had a podcast.
Yeah. Or you've had a podcast.
Yeah. I know, you were asking, to be fair, you were asking me most of the questions beforehand, so I felt like I was the guest.
Yeah, well, I always think other people are more interesting than me.
Yeah, well, most people don't think like that. So that's kind of a good thing, you know what I mean? Do you go to barbecues or like social gatherings and you find yourself asking most of the questions?
Well, I think what I did find is I've learnt 20 questions off my wife. She's a great talker. And I've learnt that sometimes when you go to a social occasion, you're feeling a bit awkward, that if you start asking people questions, most people are quite happy to talk about themselves. And so that's a really great way to kind of start a conversation.
Yeah.
Although occasionally, and I remember I did this recently, probably about a year or so ago, I went to a party and the person I was talking to, we were both trying to play that game. Both of us didn't really want to talk about ourselves and we were trying to get the other person to talk about themselves. And so that was both awkward and funny.
Yeah. Well, it made you realise probably, that it is a bit of a dance, like a good conversation is a dance.
Yeah.
And if it's just a one-way street, whether it's just purely asking questions or purely answering the questions, it can get stale after like about 10 minutes, I think. It just turns into an interview. I always get that with barbecues. I end up like just asking, and that's also like not good, but I end up just asking a bunch of questions about the person's job, and by the end of it, I know everything about their job and how they do it and how it comes together and who's involved and what the frustrations are. But then I also that's also not good either, because then you kind of walk away going, that was just like an interview, it wasn't like a conversation.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about where you grew up. I want to hear a bit. Obviously, we're going to get right into the architecture.
Yep.
Going to get right into your firm or practice. What's the right? You call it a firm or a practice? Or the same thing?
I think we call it both. Yeah.
Studio. That's a cool name for it.
Yeah. Practice is probably the one we use the most.
Yeah. Firm is probably like quite old school, like from the 80s or something.
Firm sort of sounds a bit more corporate.
Yeah.
Sounds like a bunch of lawyers or something.
Yeah. So studio is cool, practice is cool.
Yep.
Because I guess you are practicing, you're not getting it quite right yet, just practicing still.
Yep, still, yep.
So where did you grow up? I'm always kind of interested to kind of hear that.
Grew up, I was born in Lower Hutt. In Wellington. But I don't know when, but somewhere between being born and turning 2, we moved to Auckland.
Okay.
And so I kind of spent, in kind of my recollection, I spent the first kind of 5 years living in Auckland. And that was primarily because my father was at an architecture school here in Auckland.
Right.
And then when he finished, I think at that stage, I don't think jobs were that easy to come by. It's a very up and down industry in terms of the economy.
Yeah.
And he ended up having or securing a job back in Wellington, so we moved back to Wellington. So really kind of from the age of 5 through to about 20-odd, living in Wellington. And then in turn, I came up to Auckland and went to architecture school. And apart from a stint of probably sort of 2.5 years overseas and probably about a year and a half living back in Wellington after I graduated, it's pretty much been Auckland since then.
And has that like affected you at all in a way, like moving around when you were young like that? Does that give you, because I know sometimes when people move around when they're young, I moved around a lot when I was young, they tend to get more of an itch to want to move more or like looking for new horizons.
Well, I know that by the time I was 7, I'd been to 3 primary schools.
Yeah.
And I think I was incredibly shy when I was young. and I've slowly sort of, I think, grown out of that. But I remember sort of kind of getting to the third school and thinking, I just want to stay here.
Please.
And get some sort of stability because, making, a classroom of new friends in sort of 2 years period, 3 times, for me was, I wouldn't say it was stressful, but I guess I definitely preferred just to be a bit more settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of went the other way a little bit, maybe, like in terms of like, wanting that. So, okay, so you were quite shy as a kid. So,
Yep.
And then how long did that continue? Was that pretty much all the way into high school? Like,
What's that, the shyness?
Yeah, the shyness or...
Oh, look, in some ways it never really goes away. I just think you get better and better at coping.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with anything, with any sort of kind of behaviour, it's a bit like COVID. I think when COVID happened, I really feel for the generation that were kind of late teens, early 20s, and equally children younger, because they may or may not have had the mechanisms to cope with isolation or with shutdown, lockdowns and what have you. Whereas I think when you're a bit older, you've had a bit of experience, you kind of know how to manage situations in a way that allows you to cope a lot better. And so I think in terms of, I guess, other ways that we behave, as you get older and older and more experience, you just sort of develop ways of coping.
Yeah. And do you think it was it shyness, or do you think you were like just introverted, or you just didn't know what to call it?
Call it shyness, call it being an introvert.
Because sometimes I know sometimes parents love to just sort of put that, he's a bit shy or whatever.
He's an introvert,
yeah. But it could be a whole bunch of other things. Like people could just be different personalities in that.
Yep.
It may not even be shyness, I know my wife, when she was younger, everyone used to call her shy.
Yeah.
But she and one of my daughters are the same. But they're not even shy. They're just happy they'll just sort of sit. It'll be a social situation, and they'll just sort of sit there and sort of take everything in, and don't need to feel the need to say anything. Yeah, but they're happy. Yeah, So that's kind of interesting sometimes how people label these things, because there's so many different personalities, right?
There are.
Okay, so you grew up then mostly in Wellington. You went to high school there. Yep. And what was that? What was it like? Because Wellington's a bit different to Auckland, right? A little bit more. It's a bit more, would it be a bit more like progressive, a bit more like artistic, a bit more of that sort of side of things, where Auckland's a bit more of the corporate side?
I sometimes wonder how aware you are when you are growing up.
Yeah.
So we were living, I guess until I was about 17, we lived in Upper Hutt, which is not quite Wellington as such. It's a bit of a distance away from Wellington. And what was interesting, it was a fine place to grow up. I went to school. The school was okay. It wasn't great. I didn't really thrive there. That's okay. I really kind of found myself when I went to university. But I remember I went back there not too long ago, and I had quite a different perception of the place.
In what way?
Well, I went back and I thought it was actually quite depressing. And I sort of wondered whether it had kind of gone downhill since I was there, or whether this is what it was always, and when you're growing up, you're just not aware of those things.
Yeah.
It might be to do with the economy, or it might be to do with the state of building, or the environment, or, all those sorts of things that I think, but particularly as an architect, you become more and more aware of, and probably more sensitive to. But when you're 16, you don't really care, and you're not really aware as such, or maybe not as sensitive to those things.
Yeah, no, that is very interesting. Hey, so when you were like high school, were you quite creative? Were you like a creative guy, and you were like, walking around with your little camera, taking photos of everything, and doodling and stuff?
No, it was, what was it like? As I said, it really kind of clicked for me for when I got to university. I mean, I think in terms of, I was always interested in some sort of creative endeavour, but I don't think as a teenager I was particularly creative. I did art until about the fourth form, as it was then, year 10. And that wasn't a great experience. And part of the reason why it wasn't a great experience is because I don't think the teacher was particularly good.
Yeah.
And it's that you sort of often read or hear about people who say, look, the reason I became an actor is I just had this amazing drama teacher at high school, and they kind of triggered me to follow my passion. But equally, I think it can work the other way. You can have a teacher who might be teaching a subject you enjoy, but because they're not a particularly great teacher, they kind of put you off.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested as to how sensitive you are to influences. So I think all the way through, I had wanted to do something creative, but whether I expressed that in my teenage years, I don't think I really did.
It's not like a linear line though, with creativity. It's just not as, you want to become a pilot. Like I have a friend that wanted to become a pilot ever since he was young, and there's there's just like maybe 2 or 3 straight lines of how to get there.
Yeah.
And you can just choose one and off you go, being a doctor, being a lawyer. And when you want to do something creative, I mean, it's not really, it's not like that straight of a line. So you kind of have to figure it out. Was your household because your dad was an architect at that point and you lived in Upper Hutt? Did he do most of his architecture work in like Wellington, or was it around Upper Hutt, or?
Yeah, I mean, most of it was broadly in the Wellington region.
Right.
I mean, their office was in Wellington.
Okay.
We lived in Upper Hutt. We lived in a house that my father had designed and added on to. And then at some stage we moved into Wellington. This was when I was about 17. And we moved into an old house, which was then altered by my father. And I lived there until I was about 20 odd, and then I came up to Auckland.
So was your household was it creative in that sense? Like was your dad would he go to work and come home and then it would just be normal? Was he quite like a guy that would like do creative things around the house, or music or drawing or any of that sort of stuff?
I think what you are aware of, having said that you're unaware of your surroundings when you're growing up, but what I was aware of quite early on was that our house that I grew up in from 7 onwards was a little different from the houses my friends grew up in. If you say that I guess a lot of the context around where we lived were fairly typical suburban houses, built in probably the 50s, 60s and 70s as those suburbs, in Upper Hutt expanded. And what was interesting, I guess, from that is I kind of took away from that almost a non-value judgment, meaning this was the environment we grew up in, and that was the environment they grew up in terms of my friends. And I think, one wasn't better than the other.
Yeah.
It was just different,
Yeah. And what was yours like? Was there more colour? Was it a bit more different art on the wall?
We're talking 70s here. So we're talking Hessian on the walls.
Yeah.
That was there, and a lot of exposed timber.
Cool.
A lot of rough sawn timber. It wasn't necessarily smooth or dressed, and probably sort of a lot of. There was some colour, but you would say it was kind of muted. It was those sort of earthy oranges and greens and browns, rather than the primaries. We're talking cedar weatherboards on the outside. A Super 6 asbestos roof. And I guess that was probably a little different from the brick and tile environment and or weatherboard environment that we were kind of living in. Yeah.
Okay. So there was kind of like that side, you kind of grew up probably without, like you say, being aware or not aware of a sort of more of like a creative or like a different aesthetic in terms of your surrounding. Then you leave, you go to Auckland. Did you want to become an architect because your dad was an architect, or what was your thinking back then?
My thinking back then was I got to my last year of school, and I know this sounds strange, but I'd kind of run out of options, and architecture was the only option left. And by that I mean is that if I was, what I would say is I was always interested in design all the way through from when I was a kid. And I'd kind of worked my way through the options as to what that might be. Car designer, truck designer, yacht designer, industrial designer. And I kind of exhausted all those possibilities for a variety of reasons. And some of those reasons in hindsight are rather interesting. And I kind of got to last year of school, and architecture was the only one that was left. I mean, clearly, obviously, I'd grown up in an architect's house, and I was aware of architecture and what that was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't my first choice by a long shot. And I guess as you get older, you kind of reflect on that. And my first choice was actually to be a car designer.
Right.
That's what I wanted to be when I was a kid. And when I say kid, up until about 10. And what I found interesting was I had figured out at age 10 that to be a car designer, there was no car design industry in New Zealand. So you'd have to go and live overseas. And also I'd figured out that there was no car design school, if you like, in New Zealand, and you'd have to go overseas to do that. And there are a variety of, tertiary institutions that are renowned for car design.
Yeah.
And when I was 10, I couldn't quite cope with that. I couldn't cope with
having to move away,
having to leave New Zealand and study overseas, let alone live overseas. And of course, subsequently, I did that much later on to do with architecture. Therefore, car design was discounted, and I kind of had worked through, whether it was cars, trucks, yachts. I was fascinated with yacht design. Thought I was going to study industrial design at Wellington Polytech. And with that one, I went as far as going to an open day at Wellington Polytech, which was great. I was incredibly, still at that stage, I would say I was about 16 at that point. I was still incredibly naive and still very shy or introverted. And we got to the end of the day of this sort of open day, and they gathered us all back in this lecture theatre. When I say they gathered us all, because there are about 4 design streams at Polytech. It was graphic design, fashion design, industrial design. And they had a kind of a forum of recent graduates in each of the disciplines, and a bit like this, they introduced themselves and who they were and what they did. And the guy that had done industrial design, he started talking, and being the callow youth that I was, I thought he was a bit of a dick, and I thought, I don't want to do industrial design. And I kind of went back to school, after the open day, and at that stage I was into my, second to last year at school.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, industrial design's off the table.
But uninspired by the whole thing.
Yeah, just by this one interaction, making a big decision around a really small piece of information.
Yeah.
And so, coming back to where we started, architecture was the only one that was left.
And have you regretted that decision?
The industrial design decision? No. I don't regret the car design decision. That's the one that sticks with me.
Right.
And so I'm still fascinated by car design a lot. But you may say otherwise, but, for me to be a car designer, I can't actually draw that well. I've watched videos of car designers drawing, and what they can do with a pencil and some felt pens, is amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't have that skill. That's the one I would kind of like to have done, but equally realising I don't have the ability to probably do that. Yeah. So, look, I'm quite happy with the choice I made.
Yeah. That's always interesting. I mean, I think we probably don't really some people may have regrets, but there's no point really in regretting, right? But there's always something that, like, it's like the girl that got away, it's like that career that got away. It's kind of that one thing is that, oh man, if I could go back in time, maybe I will do that. So it's always kind of interesting thinking about that. In terms of, like, you said fashion design, you dress like really well, and very, like, unique to you. Mm. Has that always been the case? Have you always kind of dressed a little bit like? Are you a contrarian or no?
Have I always dressed well? I don't know. That's probably the question I can't answer. It's probably it's probably I need.
Well, I like the hat. I like the glasses. I like the look.
The hats. I mean, that's probably coincided with losing hair up top as much as anything else. Yeah, look, I've always been interested. I mean, I think there's a relationship between all the creative outlets, and whether it be fashion, whether it be art, whether it be architecture, music we were talking about earlier. I do think there is a relationship between those things, and I think you can find overlaps. I mean, I think the thing about architecture is where we I guess, being involved in it, we're probably the slowest to evolve and adapt. You know, what's happening in film and fashion and what have you is occurring much more quickly than it is in architecture. And that's just part of, the process, if you like, of building as much as anything.
This episode is brought to you by Forte, specialist in refined timber surfaces for inside and out. From elegant flooring and paneling to durable cladding and decking, Forte delivers unparalleled performance where it matters most. Their products are crafted to elevate every space, combining natural beauty with technical precision and enduring design with innovation. Discover more at forte.co.nz. So, to come back, do you think you're a contrarian?
In what sense?
And are you a type of guy that, in a general sense, work against the current, or no?
No, no. It's more. I guess as I've got older, it's just more about doing what you want to do and feeling comfortable with that. It's not a conscious decision to kind of push against something else.
Yeah.
In the way that you might think, for example, youth might do. And I think that's probably when it occurs. But no, I mean, in terms of, the things I do, it's about enjoying them. And look, if other people don't like it, that's okay.
Yeah.
But doing what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. So you start then to go to study architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Only choice that was left.
Yep.
And your dad did he have his practice at that point, or did he had his practice? And then so you went and studied architecture, and was the goal always to finish off and then go work for your dad in his practice? Or what was the trajectory after that?
No, I mean, I didn't have a particularly smooth path through university. I started at Victoria University because that's where we lived.
In Wellington?
Yeah, Wellington. And at that stage, my parents were living about 10 minutes walk from uni. So, the incentive to kind of leave wasn't particularly high. Back then when I was studying architecture, the process was you did an intermediate year at university, which, is now gone, but that was kind of a general first year university. And then from that, you would apply to get into the architecture school. And so it was kind of 1 year intermediate and then 4 years, what they called 4 professional years at a school. And so I started my intermediate at Vic. I didn't do very well in my first year and failed enough that I had to repeat. So I did 2 years of intermediate. And then I applied and got into the Victoria University School of Architecture. And I started that and didn't really enjoy that. And I must say that the course at Victoria has changed dramatically from what it was, back then. We're talking about, where are we, 1983 at this point.
Right.
And so I kind of bailed out of Victoria and kind of had a part-time year and kind of worked for a little bit, and then came up to Auckland. And then had to actually reapply to get into their first year because the first year at Vic was, rubbish.
Yeah.
Went through Auckland. And I think, what I found interesting about my time in Auckland, which I really enjoyed, was equally, I guess, the idea that I wanted to go and study overseas. So coming back to the car design, I thought I couldn't possibly go overseas and study. That's what I subsequently did. So when I graduated, I worked for about a year or two, and then I went overseas and went back to university.
And where did you go there? You went to Yale, didn't you?
Yeah.
That's very prestigious.
Yeah, it is. It is an incredibly wealthy private institution.
Yeah, what did you learn when you were over there?
It's incredibly wealthy.
You were poor
and private and on another level. And look, I mean, there are some incredible benefits of being at an institution that's so well funded. And I guess what I learned was doing things properly. And I remember kind of learning this when I took a course in perspective drawing when I was at university, and it was taught by a guy. It was taught on a Friday afternoon, and he worked at one of the local architectural practices. He came across on a Friday afternoon about 3:00 and sort of taught perspective drawing for 3 hours, and he was pretty kind of laid back, particularly for an American. He was particularly laid back. But after a while, you kind of realised he knew exactly what he was doing in terms of how he was teaching, how he was delivering, and he was really thorough, and you couldn't really fault the teaching. And so I guess kind of what I learnt there was, amongst other things, was that I don't think the students that are there are any better than the students that are coming out of the schools of architecture here. The difference is just the level of quality in terms of, over there, everybody's good because it's so competitive to get into. Whereas here at an undergraduate level, you kind of get a variance.
Yeah.
And part of it is because we're talking graduate school, so everybody's a bit older. Everybody kind of wants to be there.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, for 18-year-olds, when they go to university, they're kind of still trying to find what it is they actually want to do. And architecture might be it, or it might not be.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, why you kind of get some of the differences.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, having been at that place, when I finished, I was there for 2 years. When I finished, I was looking for a graduate job in New York, and of course, you're competing against everybody else who's piling out of these prestigious universities, because there's quite a few of them. And I didn't really have much success. So I got I was running out of money, and so I got a job as a bike courier in New York. And
wow, that's pretty cool.
I did that for 6 months, and from my point of view, what was really interesting about that was I guess I'd kind of gone from associating with a whole lot of people who were privileged in the sense that they could somehow afford or have the ability to get themselves to Yale University, and being a bike courier, which was a bit different from what it was here in New Zealand, but often the bike couriers, like I was the only white guy there. Everybody else was either Afro-American or Hispanic.
Right.
And most of them were right down the bottom of the socioeconomic heap. This was the only alternative for them in terms of work. And so that, for me, that kind of contrast between those two different social realms, I found hugely educational and of benefit to kind of be exposed to those two extremes. Let alone the other great thing about being a bike courier in New York City is you get to see New York City in a way that you don't or wouldn't as a tourist. But even living there, I mean, as a courier, you got opportunities to go into buildings, places that you would never otherwise, have the opportunity to do. So, in terms of my time in the States, I always think it's not just about going to university. It was about going to university, living in New York after graduation, and being a bike courier and kind of mixing with that kind of broad range of people.
Yeah. So you probably kind of left being one person and probably came back as a bit of another person, right? Being in your early 20s.
Yeah. I mean, definitely it was kind of an experience that had an impact, in terms of your appreciation for the fact that not everybody is as privileged as you are. And I guess that's kind of what I learned, amongst other things, from that experience,
Yeah. Okay, so you came back, and then how long was it until you joined your dad at his practice?
I pretty much when I came back.
Yeah.
That was in beginning of '94, and pretty much started work at what was then Craig Moller Architects. Beginning of '94.
Oh, cool. And what was that like? Stepping into that, was there an element of like, it's always like pros and cons. You could be the guy that works at a practice, you work your way up. You could be another guy that works for your dad, and then that could come with its own baggage and having to step into his shoes. And sometimes the dad can like overcompensate by going the other way. And what was that experience like, kind of working for your dad and then kind of trying to, becoming your own man in that environment?
I guess what I found interesting was, while I had grown up in an architect environment, and while I was well aware of the office, even when you're a kid, you kind of see what sort of office your father works in, all those sorts of things. What I found interesting was sort of the period of adjustment between, I guess by that point, having been a student for so long. In many ways, and that I'd been very slow through my intermediate, added a few years there, kind of gone through Auckland, and even then that didn't go smoothly. I kind of had to do a part-time year halfway through my university education in Auckland because I'd failed so much at one point, and I had to kind of repeat a whole lot of subjects. And then I'd spent 2 years at Yale. And so what I did find interesting was the kind of period of a time to sort of adjust from being a student and being in a university, an institution, and being in a work environment, and that's quite different. And what I thought was interesting about those two differences is that when you're at university, it actually feels incredibly free. You don't have to go to class if you don't want to. You can sleep in, or you can go to a movie, you can skip class, all those things. You can do those things. Not to say I did them, but you can. And whereas, in contrast, work can seem incredibly structured. 8:30 start, 5 o'clock finish, we take our lunch here, there's a structure. But in some ways, it's actually the opposite. In some ways, university is actually incredibly structured. There's a calendar, there's a start date, there's semesters, there's a mid-semester break, there's a mid-year break.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it provides a structure. Like my recollection of my university years is I can pinpoint what was happening in 1987 because I knew that I was in third year and we were doing this and I had those teachers. But ask me what I was doing in 1998 when I was working. I can sort of vaguely remember what projects we were working on. But, in some ways, there's kind of a limitless horizon with work. You start work and, if you don't have any goals when you start, it can kind of
everything sort of flows into each other and it becomes one long thing. Yeah.
And projects equally don't stop and start around the calendar year. They can run for years. And so it took me a while to kind of adjust to that, having been, shall we say, institutionalised.
Yeah.
For so
Were you
long.
like a bit impatient at the start as well?
No, it wasn't really impatience. It was just different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I've talked to graduates that we've subsequently employed, and, they sort of say it sort of takes a year to kind of adjust from, the requirements around university versus the requirements around work.
Yeah.
And the fact that I don't think your architectural education is finished when you finish university. I mean, there's still, a massive amount to learn. And the reason we call it practice, coming back to what you alluded to, is we're still learning, and we're still kind of practicing, trying to improve what we do, every day.
Yeah. So you obviously have like an amazing practice that you've built up over the years, and obviously your dad started it and you kind of built on top of that with him, and your dad's still in the business, right?
Yep.
In his 80s.
Yep.
Working away, going strong. You said he's working like full weeks and he's not looking like slowing down anytime soon.
No.
Which is, I think, is really cool.
Yep.
It's a cool thing, and you'll probably find he'll end up living a long time because of that, just because keeping the brain active and
that's right.
having a reason to get up in the morning, and you got goals and things you got to do. And so what does the practice look like now? So give me an idea. So who's in charge of what?
I think we would both say that each other's in charge.
Yeah. It's the opposite of like, it's not you're not fighting for power. You're fighting to relinquish the power.
I mean, I think what does a practice look like? I mean, I think there are jobs that we respectively lead. It's not to say we have our own clients, but there are jobs which are more heavily that I'm more heavily involved in. And there are clearly jobs and clients where he's more heavily involved. But generally, we're kind of aware of what's happening across the practice in terms of projects. And, I mean, it kind of ebbs and flows equally. Sometimes there'll be more projects where, my father has more involvement, and equally at times it, goes the other way. Yeah.
And how many, do you guys have a bunch of architects working there in the practice? Or how many team members do you guys have? What does that sort of look like?
We sort of fluctuate between sort of 10 and 15.
Okay.
Yeah, 15 in a good time, 10 in a not so good time.
Yeah, when you're contracting and expanding.
Yeah.
A quick shout out to Forte supporting today's episode. They work across flooring, wall surfaces, exteriors, and more. But what sets them apart is how their timber performs over time. Forte is trusted by architects, designers, and builders, not just for their materials, but for the way they support projects from vision to completion. It's about enriching connections and creating something built to last. Learn more at forte.co.nz. From an architect's perspective, like where do you, and I know that looked at your Instagram, like you do a lot of like drawing and you kind of put that in, it's like your little pet project on the side, and you kind of remain that creative elements that still keeps going. But where do you get generally your inspiration from? And is it always just from the client's brief and you just sort of try to work within that, keep within those guardrails, or do you sort of have your own sort of touches that you like to bring through when you design elements?
I think it's a mixture of everything. I mean, I think clearly, a client's brief and budget has a major impact in terms of what you're designing. And even if it's a house, there are different briefs for the individual house. The site has a big impact on what you may or may not do. I guess ideally, if you're talking about a house, for example, everybody wants a north-facing site. You kind of you probably want the backyard to be on the northern side. And given the topography of Auckland and that we're undulating, you want the slope to be to the north as well.
Yeah.
But clearly, if you don't have any of those things, then surely the design outcome is going to be quite different for a site that's south-facing and the road is on the northern frontage, and all those sorts of things. So I think site has a big impact. Could be exposed in terms of wind.
Yeah.
How do you kind of deal with that in terms of providing? I think most people would want some sort of sheltered outdoor space. So how do you provide that in a windy environment? So site has a big impact. Brief, the client. All I've ever learned is that all clients are different. They're not the same. So what works for one client won't necessarily work for another client. And then I think you do have your own predilections in terms of what you're interested in with architecture, what you think is appropriate. One thing we've always been interested in as a practice is around materiality in terms of what you're building with.
Yeah.
It might predominantly be a timber technology, particularly at a kind of a residential level. But as you move into larger buildings, it's going to be, or has always been, steel and concrete. But equally, a steel building is quite different from a concrete building. And we're kind of interested in that in terms of what that might lead to in terms of, shall we say, the expression of the building. And the other thing, I think, well, there's a number of things we're interested in, but, we are interested in that relationship between if you like, the structure of a building versus the architecture of a building, particularly when you start to get to a larger scale. How do you work with other consultants, particularly the structural engineer, in terms of integrating their requirements and their needs and your requirements and your needs, as well as the brief and the site and everything else, to kind of lead to an outcome where there's kind of a relationship, if you like, between those various parts.
Yeah, it's a bit more complicated, And it's that sort of form versus function element that you architects love to talk about a
Yeah.
lot, you know, like where it's not just pretty pictures and it's not just aesthetics and it's
Yeah.
not just like everything needs to work effectively. And that's why we always kind of talk around the office around like certain spaces that we, because through Grow, my marketing company, a lot of times we walk into like beautifully designed residential spaces,
Yep.
and we always go like, why does it feel so nice in here versus like walking into like maybe more of like a home that was bought off the plans or something like that. And what's sort of your point of view around that? Like why do some spaces feel better and you feel a bit more relaxed and it's sort of just obviously aesthetically it's more beautiful? What are some of those elements that make the difference, do you feel?
I mean, I think it's a really hard...
it's a wide question.
Well, it's a really hard thing to put your finger on as to why some spaces resonate and some don't. It's like I've been to some spaces and buildings, not necessarily houses, where you can kind of walk in and get a chill, or the hairs on the back of your neck kind of rise up. And you're thinking, well, what is it about this space that kind of resonates in that way? And it's really hard to identify what it is. But I think in some ways, it's about, I've been to some houses where, the spaces are actually too big. And I think it's about, sometimes getting those spaces to be the right size.
Yeah.
And that's not just necessarily, simple things like width and length, but also height will come into play as well. Also, its relationship to not necessarily other rooms, but to the outside spaces. I think one of the things we're always interested in, and what I like about a lot of other architects' work is what you would call that interstitial space. The space between the inside and the outside.
Right.
And so, I think, there's been a lot of development work that's been criticised recently for, overheating and things like that. And, part of it is that I think, that somebody hasn't provided that sort of shaded space. For example, in Auckland, we kind of live in a subtropical climate. And I think often we're in a situation where it's raining, it's humid. We want the windows open so we can get some ventilation, but we don't want the rain to come in. And if you don't have that sort of sheltered space, that sort of relationship between, the space you're in, which you think is feeling quite good, and the outside, you kind of want those sorts of relationships as well. But I don't think it's really answering your question in terms of...
No, I think it is, because it's like, I mean, you're touching on elements, because it is such a wide question, because sometimes it's just about, like you say, the size, it needs to be right. But I think it's almost like being congruent with everything, site, the outside, how you want to live, because some spaces are amazing because they've really like brought the view, this amazing view, and they've brought it in and it makes you feel a certain way, or in other senses, it's more the simplicity of the design, Chris Tate on like a few weeks ago, and he was more talking around if there's not too much going on, your brain doesn't have to work overtime trying to process everything around you, you know what I mean? And so if it's just sort of like one wall meeting, that meets with one floor to ceiling window, it's less to process and it's a bit easier on the senses to kind of be in that space, And I know also a lot of architects love to design their own homes on like different levels, you know what I mean? Like they love the change of levels. I don't know if you're a fan of that or not. So I'm always kind of interested of why do you let me ask you about that then, the levels, like why is that? Is that just to create like little kind of like, pockets of the house that you interact with it in different ways? Or why do you think that the level change in that? So like architects love that so much.
I mean, some of it can be, you could say some of it's justified in the sense from the site.
Yeah, because it might be a sloping site.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that, particularly in the 60s when a lot of spec houses were built, they had a sloping site, they built a house which was essentially one level, and then you kind of ended up with this sort of subterranean basement space, which might have become a rumpus room at some point. But But really what it meant is the living spaces didn't really have a great relationship with the outside spaces. They weren't connected. And then now what tends to happen, or what I observe happening with spec houses, is that whoever's developed the subdivision goes around and terraces the whole subdivision in terms of providing a series of flat sites and then retaining walls to kind of provide continuity, if you like, between inside and outside. Because that's kind of our catchphrase, it's even on the vacuum cleaner ad or whatever I remember. And I think, the other way, if you like, and I'm sure there are many ways, but the other way is you leave the sloping site as it is. And one way to kind of deal with that is you design a house that's on multiple levels. Yeah. So that each room, if you like, has an opportunity to kind of connect or have a relationship, with the outside. In some way. So I think that's one reason why that happens. I think the other reason is that changes in level can help define spaces when walls are not doing that job anymore. I mean, I think if you look at the transition from, say, the villa, which had a series of individual rooms and there was an activity in each room, to kind of I guess a more contemporary situation where the living, kitchen, dining is fairly standardised now in terms of being in one space, and sometimes people are comfortable with that, but sometimes you could say, well, that doesn't provide much sort of differentiation between those spaces, and changes of level, that can be floor, it can be ceiling, can actually then give some definition as to an area for dining, an area for living, an area for cooking.
Without the walls.
As well as a whole range of other kind of things that you could do in terms of defining those spaces. Window seats, bay windows, verandas, decks, and what have you.
Yeah, bay windows. I know, like architects love those as well. I think it's because I guess it's like multiple usage for those sort of bay windows. You put seats in there, and people can like read their books there, and the sun's coming in, especially in New Zealand.
I don't think you'd find many people who don't like a window seat. Particularly if it's sunny.
Yeah, exactly. So you obviously you guys do a lot of commercial work. You've done you've done towers and China and like done all sorts of like amazing jobs. And I guess people listening can go have a look at your guys' Instagram and your website. I was actually blown away looking at just all the projects you guys have been involved in, you and your dad. Obviously from the residential side, we have a lot of builders that listen, at least 3 or 4 builders that listen to this. And how have you found that relationship with where we're at right now in terms of the process of building? Because I think some may argue it's not, it's maybe could be broken, some could say, or some could say it's maybe not the best way. But I know that you were involved with the New Zealand Institute of Architecture, right? Were you the president of that?
Recently.
Was that you or your father?
I was convener of the awards program recently.
Okay, right. I think I read something like that. But I know that they like their process is very much like, client sees the architect draws everything up, go to 3 builders, they quote for the job, and then boom, you go ahead. What often tend to happen is these days is that the client gets overexcited, it gets drawn over budget. You could argue, some may argue the architect don't have their finger on the pulse, but I think you could also argue that they probably pushing back against the client's hefty dreams and vision as well. And then obviously the architect wants to draw something that's aesthetically beautiful and something that has wow factor. Then by the time it actually gets to the builder, it's always drawn over price. So the argument there is that you always get the builder involved a bit earlier could be a better way. What's your sort of point of view on that whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the process is interesting. I guess the first thing is people don't like being told no. It's just one comment to make. So it's very hard to say no to someone, no, you can't afford that. And the other thing I've experienced is it doesn't matter what the client's budget is. Generally, and we only operate in a certain sphere, but generally people want more than they can afford. And often their budget is based on what they can afford, not necessarily what their brief might be.
Yes.
Not to say that's true of all cases, but I think sometimes that happens. So someone says, "Look, I want to add on to our house, and I think we can raise 500,000." And at that stage, has anybody done an analysis to say what they want to do versus what they've got in the kitty? Do those two marry? Yeah. And so part of the process is to kind of bring those two things together. Ultimately, in terms of should we say whatever the market's doing, it'll come down to what the builder's price is. Yeah. Look, I mean, I was listening to one of your other podcasts the other day, and talking about a process of engaging a quantity surveyor early on to provide some sort of cost analysis. And look, I think that's a really great process in terms of one, it's an independent piece of advice. And two, that's what they're doing each and every day. They're estimating jobs, but then again, you're reliant on the expertise of the quantity surveyor. They're not going to provide the ultimate price, if you like, to build. So look, I mean, there are ways of engaging builders earlier in that process in terms of pricing, but equally. The other thing to appreciate with a small domestic scale builder is that they're probably pricing jobs in their, should we call it their spare time? Yeah. So, they are sort of, 40 hours a week on the tools, and then they're probably, pricing work in the evening. Yeah. So, and look, I mean, whether it's right or wrong, they're not getting paid for that tendering. And so if they've gone through one of 3 tenders, there's a 66% chance that work that they've done is not going to, return. Yeah. So look, I mean, it's a. I don't think there's a one clear best process. Yeah. With particularly around the residential. Ideally, you would get a builder early on. They would negotiate the price, open book, whatever it might be, in terms of that process, and arrive at a happy outcome. Yeah. But then, from a client's perspective, they're going, well, how do I know I'm getting fair market value? Because it's not a competitive process. And look, there are ways of, I think, getting around that. But, it's difficult in terms of making sure, coming back to, fundamentally what you're asking is making sure that clients' expectations and budget are aligned. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's no right way, and I don't think like just getting the 3. The reason I don't like the 3 quotes sometimes, I'm talking residential now. Obviously, it's very different if it's like the upper end commercial and people are putting tenders forward, but because it's not just based on price, right? There's so many other data points that need to be considered. Yep. And then also like sometimes builders, especially in the residential side. I just think a lot of builders, guys that's been around, a long time, 20 years, 30 years, have that sort of practical input that can be given around providing some feedback around whether you could rework the foundations and make it a bit more cost effective, or you could, just maybe the over-engineered some element that the builder has maybe a different, point of view of how that could be built to bring down costs and things like that. But I think that's like kind of playing in the minutiae of it all. It's kind of in those sort of elements, I think the builder can add a lot of value as well. In terms of where you're at right now, like what's the goal for you as you kind of move forward with the practice? I mean, you mentioned that one of your kids is studying architecture. Yep. Is it going to be 3 generations working in one practice?
Look, I mean, the good thing from my point of view is that my father never pressured me to study architecture and never pressured me to join the practice. Those were my decisions. And in some ways, I've taken the same approach. In actual fact, when my son announced he was off to Vic to study architecture, that was a surprise to both me and my wife that he was interested in doing that. And as I've subsequently found out, that had been a goal of his for quite some time. He just never voiced it. And equally, I think it's up to him in terms of what he wants to do. I always think it's beneficial, regardless of where you end up in practice, to have worked for a number of other practices. And so, whether it was through holiday periods, part-time jobs, post-university experience, I've worked for some other practices because I think it's just really interesting. I always think, the interesting thing about practice is, we've participated in the open days that the Institute of Architects run around about September each year. We open up our office on a Saturday and people come through. And one thing I always say is, look, we're all practicing architecture, but we're all practicing it slightly differently, and it'll be based on the size of the practice, the type of work we're doing, and who's running the joint. And so I think getting experience from different types of practices is of benefit to anybody in practice. If they start their own practice, or indeed eventually join another practice. And so I'd always encourage people, graduates, to have a range of experiences before they might sort of, should we say, lock in on a kind of a long-term goal.
No, I think that's great advice. And in terms of the architecture in New Zealand as well, I want to get your view on this as well. Like, do you think New Zealand has a really defined style of architecture? I know that I talk to a lot of Australian builders. They always praise New Zealand architecture, just New Zealand, And I think sometimes the vernacular, using a big word there, of the surrounding area, and that kind of helps sometimes where the homes sit and all that. But New Zealand's, they praise it. They think New Zealand's architecture is amazing. I know that I heard from someone the other through Forte actually, who's partners up with this podcast. I had a chat with guys there, and he mentioned that he talked to local project said to him that their videos that are based on New Zealand architecture do 10 or 15 or 20% better on YouTube than Australian architects. People seem to love it. What's the thing about New Zealand architecture that makes it you guys sort of punch above your weight? And do we have do New Zealand architects have a unique style to them, do you think?
I think we're always interested in the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And so, I think, we probably look to Australian architecture and think exactly the same thing. There's some really good architecture in Australia, some really good architects there, and amongst some of the work there seems to be something which is sort of quintessential Australian, but you can't quite really kind of put your finger on it. And as soon as you do put your finger on it, you realise it's probably not Australian as much as you thought. And I think as an outsider, it's always easier to see those things. I remember the first time I went to New York, I all of a sudden saw a whole lot of things that people were wearing, the haircuts they had, that seemingly there was kind of a thing happening. So when I was there, people were stomping around in motorbike boots. That was a thing. Or a whole lot of Afro-American men were having those sort of boxed flat top haircuts, that was a thing, or Timberland boots and white singlets. And that's kind of the outsider observing. So I think in terms of New Zealand, I think there are some architects that are not themselves necessarily trying to produce a quintessential, New Zealand architecture, but there are kind of identifiable things about their work that you might say is representative of New Zealand. But then I suspect if you looked at it a bit more closely, you would say, well, yeah, but those things are happening in Australia as well. And then I think there are some architects that are probably interested in different things. I won't say they're not interested in New Zealand, they're just interested in different things. But again, they might have aspects of their work which you might say is peculiar to the region in some way. And it's sort of like, for example, I had a conversation with another architect recently who was asking me about if I, having been on a jury tour around New Zealand, looking at New Zealand architecture, whether there were regional traits. And what was interesting is our kind of conversation was, from my point of view, around what you might do in terms of climate. So, the climate in Auckland and North is quite different from the climate in central Otago. And the climate in central Otago between summer and winter is quite different. Whereas, the climate in Auckland between summer and winter is not as extreme. And so therefore, an architectural response to that, and I guess I'm really sort of kind of talking around the domestic level, might be quite different. In central Otago in winter, you're kind of wanting to hunker down, and minimise your heat loss and make sure you're well insulated. And so that might generate a particular response to that kind of environment, if you're interested in that sort of idea. And look, not all architects might be.
Yeah.
Whereas in Auckland, coming back to what I said earlier, it kind of rains a lot and it's humid. And so, your architecture might be a bit more open, but providing a bit more sheltered outdoor space, so you can be a bit more open.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I like that practical element of it comes into play, and we forget sometimes because even down there, the coolest homes there are kind of like bunkered into the cliff, or it's kind of like a different style, but there's that sort of function.
Yeah,
requirement. And
particularly if you look at the older buildings and how they responded, and the fact that you had, nowadays it's pretty much standard. You're going to build out of schist if you're in that region. But, the fact that there was schist there, and that became one of the, staple building materials for their cottages and the like, which is quite different from, the plentiful native timber forest that we used to have, shall we say, up in the, top half of the North Island.
Yeah.
But again, I guess what I'm portraying there is kind of my preferences around architecture. In terms of what I identify with.
Yeah.
And look, each architect will be different in terms of their kind of take, if you like.
Do you have a favourite project, a favourite child in terms of the projects that you've designed over the years?
I think there are a few. You're not supposed to identify the favourite child. My daughter asks that all the time. Not all the time, that's unfair to her. She asks it and I say, well, look, you're my favourite daughter. Because I've only got one daughter. Look, in terms of projects, I think there are some that we've been involved in that you feel have kind of come together well. And I think what's interesting is that every time I've been to an awards program where an architect has got up to receive an award, generally what you'll find is the client-architect relationship has been really good. And the third party I would kind of add into that, as well as the other consultants, would be the builder, coming back to the questions you were asking earlier, is that if you've had a builder that's been really engaged and has been, shall we say, happy about the process, and they've really enjoyed building the project, that kind of love will come through in a project as well. And I think when you kind of get those 3 or 4 components coming together, then you end up with a really good project.
Yeah,
I think there are lots of projects that we've been involved in that have ended up in the bottom drawer for whatever reason, meaning they haven't been built. And I've enjoyed those. But for whatever reason, they haven't come to fruition equally.
Yeah.
But, you still enjoy them for what they were.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk for quite a bit here, and we've run out of time, but I thank you so much for coming on, Craig. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you. No, it's been good.
And it was just sort of interesting kind of hearing the background and sort of hearing, obviously finding out who the person is behind the practice.
Yep.
And I think you, and as well as your father as well, have done an amazing job. So, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
That's it for today's episode. And thanks again to Forte for making this week's episode possible. If you're after timber surfaces that don't just look beautiful, but are built to endure, Forte is leading the way with a focus on sustainability and craftsmanship and unparalleled performance. They're helping bring ambitious projects to life across interiors and exteriors.